Welcome back to Pokemon Episode Summaries. Today, I'll be doing Episode 74, The Ancient Puzzle of Pokemonopolis. The episode begins with Ash finally training for the Pokemon League. That's right, he's actually doing it, and he's doing so with Brock in a rocky area, as he sends out his Vulpix, and Ash sends out his Pikachu, and meanwhile, Misty is simply fishing. The battle between Ash and Brock starts off with both Pokemon using agility and using it to dodge each other, and then Pikachu goes in for a Thunderbolt, and Brock orders Vulpix to go for a Flamethrower. However, as they're both about to fire these attacks, Jigglypuff shows up, oh my god, and jumps between them, which leads Ash and Brock to direct Pikachu and Vulpix to send their attacks in a different direction, since they don't want to injure the Jigglypuff, obviously. And when they do, the attacks end up combining and hitting a nearby cliff, and the attack's combined strength is enough to severely damage the cliff, which was currently being occupied by a whole bunch of archaeologists. And Ash and the gang immediately run up to this cliff to check on the damage that they caused, unaware of the archaeologist's existence. And when they arrive at the cliff, they see that their attacks had not only severely damaged the cliff, but in the process also unveiled what Brock points out looks like an entrance to a temple with a huge-ass bell on it. Ash compliments Pikachu on how strong he was, being able to fucking unveil an entire lost temple, as Brock examines the surrounding area that was also caught in the explosion, and finds a mysterious artifact. As if on cue, one of the archaeologists, who we find out is named Eve, reveals herself, and immediately takes the artifact from Brock's hand, and starts examining it. And she proceeds to take it to the other archaeologists, and shows it to her boss, claiming it as her own discovery, which pisses Ash and the gang off, as Brock clarifies by running up to them that he was actually the one who found the artifact. Eve seemingly wasn't aware of this, as she was just so caught up with spotting an artifact that she just instantly grabbed it without thinking. So when she realizes that Brock was actually the one who found it, she apologizes to him and thanks him for finding it for her. Due to a girl actually showing Brock affection for once, he obviously begins to blush, much to Ash and Misty's dismay, who are just sick of Brock's bullshit at this point. But you can't really blame him this time, as at least the girl seemed to be somewhat interested. The girl then instantly shrugs off Brock, though, after thanking him, and immediately gets back to the archaeologists, telling them that they should set up camp, as she wants to study more, being heavily interested in what the artifact entails. However, the other archaeologists reveal that they were one step ahead of her and have already set up a camp, so they instantly go inside, as Team Rocket spies in the distance, looking for an opportunity to find something to steal. And I mean, they probably would find something to steal. I'm sure the archaeologists have dug up plenty of shit by now, and it's revealed that they have, as when Ash and the gang and Eve go inside the tent, they see a whole bunch of artifacts that the archaeologists have in fact already dug up, including one that Misty points out looks like a Psyduck, and one that resembles a brown bear of some kind. I don't think that's a Pokemon. I wonder what the fuck that is. Eve then reveals to Ash and the gang that all these items had a common link, being that they were all theorized to come from an ancient civilization that was known as Pokemonopolis, a city that got completely wrecked in a single night by a storm many decades ago. Just then, the leader of the archaeologists comes rushing into the tent, saying that he has discovered a new artifact. It was a spoon, and the same color and texture and everything as the artifact that they had discovered earlier, suggesting a very heavy link between the two. Further proof that there was a link between the two items happens when Pikachu notices that the original artifact that they found begins to glow blue when it was placed next to the spoon. Pikachu tries to inform Ash of this, but Ash obviously can't understand what Pikachu is saying, so his efforts are useless. While Ash was talking to Pikachu, the archaeologist leader, who was extremely fond of Eve due to her essentially doing all of the Pokemonopolis digging on her own, like she was essentially the only archaeologist actually doing any work, proceeds to gush her up, basically explaining her backstory and how amazing she was. She was essentially an archaeologist prodigy from a young age, being interested in archaeology since she was 6, and officially becoming an archaeologist only at age 9. Brock rightfully questions how a kid can get a job at 9, despite Pokemon trainers literally happening at 10, but, you know, I guess archaeology is a little bit different. Anyways, other than Brock's little comment there, Ash and the gang are very impressed at Eve for her accomplishments at such a young age, and, you know, being able to essentially be a better archaeologist as a kid than many adults were, and Eve gets embarrassed at all the positive attention she was getting, and proceeds to physically push her leader out of the tent so that he stops talking, despite him being, like, super nice to her and, like, gushing her up. She fucking hits him. What a bitch. I know she was anxious, but, like, damn. With the leader now gone, Eve goes back to showing Ash and the gang all of the artifacts that were on the table in the tent. In particular, she shows them a stone tablet. The tablet has ancient writings on it that talk about two great powers, a shadow and a dark force of destruction, that will fight and destroy the world, and there was apparently no way to stop them that a human was aware of. This tablet was apparently written by some of the ancient people of Pokemonopolis as some sort of prophecy, but then their civilization proceeded to get destroyed, and it seemed that whoever these dark forces were could have been the causes. Eve then suggests that her and the archaeologist should get back to digging, as they should try and find more information regarding the dark forces. And Brock proceeds to volunteer both himself and Ash and Misty to help dig as well, claiming that the reason was simply because he loved digging, which impressed Eve, but Misty and Ash knew the true reason, being that Brock just wanted to impress Eve. Ash and Misty try to explain this to Eve as Brock runs off to go digging, but Eve doesn't understand, as she's just too fucking occupied by the thought of digging. Everyone then proceeds to dig for the rest of the day, with Team Rocket still spying, and eventually nighttime hits, and all the archaeologists and Ash and the gang go to sleep. While Ash and the gang are sleeping, however, Team Rocket reveal that they had been planning this entire day while spying, and have come up with a plan to break into the ancient temple that was uncovered and check its remains to see if there was any artifacts, choosing to do so at night because Ash and the gang would be asleep. They were also initially just going to do something that they would usually do, which is steal from Ash and the gang and the archaeologists. They were just going to take all the artifacts that they already had, but Jessie was against this idea, as she wanted some new shit, not stuff that was already used. Anyways, Jessie and James arrive at the remains of the temple, and Jessie sends in her Arbok to go do the dirty work for them, because they're lazy bitches. And while Arbok is gone, Jessie and James fantasize about what they would use all of the money that they got for selling the artifacts for. And, Jessie was probably thinking something a lot different than James, who was like, the first thing I'm going to do is pay off my debt to Giovanni. And she's like, why the fuck would you do that when the artifacts could make us so rich that we could just leave Team Rocket and start our own organization? Just then, Arbok returns from its search in the temple with 3 black orbs in its mouth, interrupting Jessie and James's arguing. Jessie instantly questions the Arbok like, dude, that's all that you could find? I was expecting some gold or some shit. And to be fair, all the other artifacts were gold. Out of nowhere, though, the black orbs start glowing, and then they suck up Arbok inside them as he disappears, much to Team Rocket's shock. And then, Team Rocket gets levitated by these black orbs and proceed to get sucked inside as well, due to being frozen in place and unable to escape. Although they certainly tried to run away, so that's why, as they're sucked in and they spot footprints, they believe that the footprints were simply theirs from all the running around. However, the footprints were actually not theirs, but they came from the black orbs. As when the black orbs floated up to capture Team Rocket, they made those footprints, indicating that there was something very mysterious about those dark orbs. I mean, how the fuck can they create footprints when they're not even touching the ground, huh? By the morning, the black orbs had floated themselves over to the location of the archaeologist camp. The leader, being the first one up, was the first one to discover these orbs, and he identified them as some sort of dark device that he had read about from another artifact that he had discovered, indicating that these black orbs were also related to Pokemonopolis. The leader goes to pick up the black orbs to further examine them, but when he does, the black orbs then suck him inside, just as they did Team Rocket and Arbok. Speaking of Team Rocket and Arbok, they were watching the man get sucked in from inside of the black orbs, as the black orbs transported you into a little area, and you were able to see the outside from there. Anyways, Ash and the gang and all the other archaeologists are obviously freaked out by seeing their leader just disappear into thin air, so they all proceed to run away from the black orbs, but the black orbs float around and chase all of them, trapping them all inside, with the exception of Eve and Ash and the gang, because they managed to get to safety in time by running to one of the archaeologist's trailers. As for all the other archaeologists, though, they were now inside the black orbs, and it was getting pretty cramped in the little space there. Anyways, as Ash and the gang arrive in the trailer, they find that all of the artifacts that had since been placed there were now floating in the air for some reason. They can just barely question why, as the black orbs then transform into a huge Gengar with weird markings, and proceeds to cause a huge storm somehow, indicating destruction was on its way. Ash and the gang immediately rush outside the trailer, and Ash uses his Pokedex on the Gengar to try and identify what was up with it, and the Pokedex essentially reveals that it had no data on this Gengar, indicating that the Gengar was really different, and it may not have even really been a real Gengar. Perhaps just the form that the artifact had decided to take on. However, that doesn't mean that it didn't have the powers of a Gengar, though, and this Gengar was planning to use the powers for destruction as it headed back towards Pallet Town to destroy it. Ash immediately panics and begins following the Gengar, wanting to save Pallet Town before it was destroyed, and Misty follows him as well, with Brock soon trailing behind, but not before warning Eve to go back to the trailer and take shelter, while also trying to figure out the cause of why the Gengar appeared. And why the items were floating, for that matter. Eve obliges as she heads back to the trailer, and Ash and the gang run off in pursuit of Gengar. Meanwhile, at Oak's lab in Pallet Town, he looked on the horizon with Ash's Muck and Krabby as he saw the storm approaching, believing that it was simply a mere storm, unaware of the Gengar currently rampaging towards the town. Meanwhile, back with Ash and the gang trailing Gengar, Ash had decided to send out his Pidgeotto, and Brock had decided to send out his Onix, and they both proceeded to attack the Gengar. Pidgeotto used Gust, but it did absolutely jack shit, and Pidgeotto ended up getting sucked into Gengar, because now instead of getting sucked into the black balls, if Pidgeotto just made contact with the Gengar, it would have the same effect. Ash and Misty are in shock at Pidgeotto's sudden absorption, just as Pidgeotto arrives inside the void where all the other captured people were, and Jessie immediately scolds the Pidgeotto for failing. Damn, why are you getting mad at the Pidgeotto, bro? You didn't get mad at your own Pokemon for getting sucked in. With Pidgeotto gone, Brock has Onix try to attack the Gengar on its own, as he asks it to use Bind and wrap around Gengar's leg to try and throw it off balance, but as soon as it touches the Gengar, it just gets absorbed like Pidgeotto did, which I'm sure was not to the delight of everyone else in the void, as Onix was fucking huge and they were already extremely cramped. With both Pidgeotto and Onix now gone, Ash and the gang decide to retreat back to the trailer, but the Gengar is now super angry at them, so instead of continuing on its way to Pallet Town, it decides to chase after them back to the trailer. As soon as Ash and the gang enter the trailer, they immediately find not only all the items still floating, but they find Eve possessed. She was possessed when she was trying to figure out the connection between the original artifact that Brock found and the spoon artifact, and when she touched them together, they had a reaction that caused her to become possessed. Seeing the possessed Eve, Brock, being the simp that he is, immediately goes and tries to go up to her and save her from the possession, but Ash holds him back, being like, yo, what if you touch her and you catch the spell too? Then you'll go insane. Just then, the spoon and the original artifact that Brock found, floating in the air, bump into each other, and their reaction once again causes something to happen. This time, it causes Eve to be lifted from the possession, and the two artifacts to combine with each other into an alakazam somehow, likely due to the possessive energy being retracted from Eve and onto the back to the two artifacts. Anyways, the point was, the two artifacts had transformed into an alakazam, okay? Don't question it. And this alakazam also had weird markings that were very similar to Gengar's. As soon as Ash sees the alakazam, he immediately mistakes it for a Kadabra, with Brock correcting him, and suggesting that he should use his Pokedex if he was going to say something that's stupid. So Ash does manage to use his Pokedex on the alakazam, but it unfortunately has no data on it, just like the Gengar as well. Just then, the alakazam rushes up to Gengar, and the two begin to battle. Alakazam starts by using Levitate to levitate a whole bunch of rocks and try and throw them at Gengar, but they miss, and then Gengar proceeds to use a lick on the Alakazam to try and paralyze it, but it also fails. So, the two Pokemon then get into a clash between Gengar's Nightshade and Alakazam's Psybeam, and the two attacks collide, which causes a huge fucking explosion, which Ash and the gang and Eve observe. When Eve sees this explosion, she comes to the conclusion that the Gengar and Alakazam must be the two great powers of destruction that were spoken of on the ancient tablet, and they had returned from their initial battle to fight each other yet again, and that would in turn cause destruction in the present day, much like it did in the past when it destroyed Pokemonopolis. This explained why the two artifacts had a reaction when they connected, as the two artifacts must have been connected just as the Alakazam and Gengar were connected through destiny in the prophecy. Eve blames herself for not recognizing that the prophecy could happen again in the present, and that's why it was left as a warning, and claims that she should have never tried to uncover the secret of Pokemonopolis in the first place, as it could put the world at risk, like it was doing right now. Ash and the gang then assure her that it wasn't her fault, though, with Misty reasoning that she had no way to know that the prophecy was referring to the present as well, and Ash was like, yeah, it's the original writer's fault, they should have just made it clear. But come on, Ash, you know ancient civilizations like to hype things up and talk super mysteriously and dramatically. Anyways, with Eve now comforted, Ash and the gang divert their efforts back to trying to stop the Gengar and Alakazam before they destroy the world. Ash tries to capture them in Pokeballs, but unfortunately this effort is useless, as Alakazam and Gengar just use their attacks to destroy the Pokeballs before they can reach them. This annoys the Alakazam and Gengar, who team up for a brief moment to both use a disable on Ash and the gang, making them unable to move. As the truth is quickly broken and the Pokemon begin fighting once again, it's revealed that Pikachu had avoided the disable somehow, so it wasn't frozen. So this led Ash to order the Pikachu to go into the water and use an electric attack, so that the electric attack would spread around everywhere and be big enough to shock the Gengar and Alakazam at the same time, despite their huge size. Pikachu does just this, shocking the Gengar and Alakazam, along with everyone still trapped inside the void. But unfortunately, the attack isn't enough to take out the Alakazam or the Gengar, although it is enough to weaken them enough so that their disable attack no longer has any effect. So it frees Ash and the gang from being frozen, and they're able to take cover behind a rock as the Pokemon continue to fight. Their attacks then cause another huge explosion, which catches Jigglypuff, as Jigglypuff was currently walking around in the area coincidentally. The force of the explosion knocks Jigglypuff over to Ash and the gang's rock, and when Misty spots Jigglypuff, she comes up with the idea to try and have the Jigglypuff sing to put the Gengar and Alakazam to sleep. Ash encourages the Jigglypuff to sing by stating that if it did, then he would make sure that it would become Pallet Town's favorite vocalist, and this motivates the Jigglypuff enough to go along with Misty's idea, as Ash and the gang retreat further up to a cliff as opposed to a rock, and watch the situation with binoculars so that they don't have to get too up close to the Pokemon, hoping that due to them being farther away, they wouldn't be put asleep by Jigglypuff singing. Jigglypuff proceeds to sing, as Ash and the gang cover their ears for extra protection, and unfortunately, even Jigglypuff's singing doesn't even work against Alakazam and Gengar, as the Jigglypuff is too small to be loud enough for them to hear. However, Jigglypuff's singing does put everyone inside of Alakazam and Gengar, like Team Rocket and all the archaeologists, to sleep, so that begs the question if maybe Alakazam and Gengar just had, like, ear protection in or some shit, or they had ways to block out Jigglypuff in a way. Or who knows, maybe it would have worked eventually, but we don't get to find out, as Alakazam and Gengar end up hitting Jigglypuff as they were hitting each other, and this sends Jigglypuff blasting off due to being so small and not being able to withstand their huge bodies. So now, Jigglypuff was gone! Great, even Jigglypuff didn't work. We can't have a Pokemon episode without a Deus Ex Machina moment though, so suddenly, it's revealed that despite the Jigglypuff song not being enough to put the Gengar Alakazam to sleep, it was enough to activate a bell that was on the temple that Ash and the gang had saw earlier. This bell then transforms, just as the other two artifacts had, but this bell transforms into a giant Jigglypuff, signifying that Jigglypuff and its song were somehow connected to this ancient civilization. Man, I wish we actually got like more clarity on what the lore of this place was, as we never get any actual details. But anyways, this huge-ass Jigglypuff was actually the bell. And it proceeds to sing with a deep enough voice that it's actually able to put the Gengar and Alakazam to sleep. And Ash and the gang try their best to cover their ears so that they don't get put to sleep. But if they couldn't withstand a regular Jigglypuff song, oh man, there was no way they were going to withstand this one. Pikachu and Togepi fall asleep as well. And just like the smaller Jigglypuff, this causes the huge Jigglypuff to get mad that everyone fell asleep to its song, and it proceeds to take its microphone, which was the head of the bell, and turns it into a paintbrush and proceeds to paint on Alakazam and Gengar's faces. Damn, what an upgrade. We went from a marker to a paintbrush. Damn. Is that maybe why the Alakazam and Gengar had markings all over them? Was it because they've encountered this Jigglypuff before, and the Jigglypuff scribbled on them? I guess we'll never know. Sometime later, the storm had cleared off, and it was now evening time as Ash and the gang woke up. They woke up to discover that the three giant Pokemon were mysteriously gone, and the artifacts had reappeared in their place instead, signifying that, for some strange reason, they had returned into the artifacts. And once again, we don't know why. I wish we got more actual lore on this. But thankfully, due to all of the Pokemon going back into the artifacts, this set free all of the people that they trapped, including the Archaeologists and Team Rocket, and Pidgeotto and Onix as well. Team Rocket cry in happiness at the fact that they're free, due to being super uncomfortable in the cramped space. But then they notice Ash and the gang watching them, and proceed to run away, in fear of being blasted off, because that would only add insult to injury. Wow, they actually didn't get blasted off this episode. Epic. The episode then ends with Ash and the gang going back up to all the artifacts, and Eve theorizing that perhaps the artifacts actually acted as ancient Pokeballs, as they seem to have trapped the big Pokemon inside. So, she decides to keep the artifacts to herself and try and study them more, as Ash and the gang say goodbye and go back to Pallet Town.